And we'd like to welcome you to California Zooming today. We were asked to give a little talk about what's it mean to fly in California. Brian and I have both been flying in California for a long time, and we thought we'd throw a little bit together here on some of the things that make flying in California particularly interesting, challenging, and difficult.
I don't think we can cover all the oddities in just an hour though, Mike, can we?
We didn't tell them, but we're going to take over the whole day and talk about why it's odd to fly in California.
We should do that. There are enough oddities to do so.
And not just you and me.
Yeah. What a couple of handsome guys.
Yeah, where'd they find those guys? So that's Brian and me. We do a lot of talks together in different venues, and we have a lot of fun doing it, to be quite honest. And so let's have a little bit of fun today with what it's like flying in and around California. So our flight plan today is we're going to talk about, in particular, why California flying is so complex, probably more complex than flying in a lot of other places in the country and maybe even the world. We put together a little flight plan we're going to take you on around the state to give you a little taste of some of the things that are weird. And there is one thing common about all the airports that we've chosen to visit in our flight today. So see if you can figure out what that common link is. And then finally, we'll close it up with some general flying tips.
I took a break from flying in California for a little while, moved to St. Louis and flew in an area with no mountains, no ocean, no airspace, and no pilots, really airplanes flying around and no traffic. Came back to California, and boy, you really learn to appreciate what we have going on here when you leave and come back.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I spent some time in Missouri and Chicago, and I really don't like being with someplace that doesn't have mountains. It's weird not to live next to an ocean. I don't mind missing the tornado alarms all the time, the tornado sirens in Kansas City. That was an exciting part that I don't mind leaving behind, but we just get earthquakes instead.
Exactly. What I love about California is we have restaurants on airports.
A lot of them. Some of them are still open.
Yeah.
So visit those ones that are.
Right.
So to start out today, we mentioned earlier we have some door prizes you probably saw in our opening billboards. Some thanks to some generous sponsors who have given us some great door prizes to give away. Brian and I have the honor today of giving away a Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset. So you can read the text there. I've used the Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset, and it's an awesome piece of equipment. And I want to win this myself, Brian. What do I have to do that?
Yeah, I think you have to join CalPilots and be a member for one thing, and then be available toward the end of the day or at the end of this webinar. We're going to be announcing the winner for these Lightspeeds, right? At the end of when we're done talking. Yeah,
exactly. And if you're not a member of CalPilots right now, you should join CalPilots. And if you join before the end of this talk, then you'll be eligible to win this prize and any of the other prizes that we'll have to give away throughout the day today. So we talked a little bit already about terrain that we have in California. We have a couple of different types of terrain. The first that we get to deal with is natural terrain. So how did we landed in this spot that happens to share the lowest point in the continental United States.
Yeah, we're a state of superlatives, some of the highest and lowest.
And we're not just talking Brian and me.
Yeah.
So we've got six major mountain ranges, including the highest point in the lower 48, just about 60, 70 miles away from the lowest point. So it's kind of weird that in such a short distance, we get both those ends of the superlatives. Got a lot of coastline. A lot of other places have mountains, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming. I'm looking at you, but they don't have a coastline to go with them.
You ever flown that entire coast, Mike?
No, I've flown across the ocean on the other side of that coast, but I have not done the north to south trip. I've done it from Point Conception to the Mexican border. I've done down at about 600 feet several times. That's a lot of fun.
I've flown the entire border, and you get to see some things that normal people just don't get to see from an airplane. There are a couple spots along this coastline where you do have to cut inland, however, for airspace, so be careful about that.
Yeah, in fact, there's an interesting seminar coming up in about a week and a half on flying the California coast, so I'm looking forward to attending that one myself.
Yeah.
And we've got deserts. The deserts are all on fire right now, I think. Now we move to some human terrain. So not only are we the most populous state, almost 500 cities, actual cities in the state, 3 of them have over 1 million people. And I don't think there's another state in the country that has that going on. So we got a ton of people. It's a big state, people moving around all the time. And so this generates a lot of traffic, and it makes it one of the most heavily populated parts of the country to fly in an airplane. And we got some parks and some forests, and right now, maybe it's a good thing we're virtual this year. Trying to fly all of us together to one place to meet in person would have been quite a challenge this year, I think. With all these national forests and parks that are on fire right now, not a great time to fly this week, but when it does get clear, these give you just amazing vistas to really enjoy out the airplane as you fly around.
Yeah, if you're looking for a great place to fly, put these on your list and look for some great state parks. That in itself would make a good webinar all by itself.
Yep, you bet. And then we have also got a special type of airspace. I put quotes around that. The FAA is the organization that designates airspace, and yet we have some airspace that's designated to the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I think we've got a talk coming up a little bit later on today that's going to address that. So we won't spend a lot of time on that particular issue today. Let's see if I can get to the next one. Here we go.
I challenge any state to beat this record.
Any one of those records. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. You really have to know your way around a chart. A couple years ago, I had a cousin come out from upstate New York, and I dropped the local sectional chart in his lap, and you could see his jaw hit the floor. He was amazed at how much airspace we have to deal with. So there's a lot going on. It's
a bit overwhelming, and when I flight instructed out in the Midwest, I'd pull out a Los Angeles sectional or a terminal area chart, and you want to see some wide eyes of students looking at that chart, but it's the greatest place to teach airspace. And around here as a California pilot, you really need to know it.
Yeah, you got to know it well. So then we move into the air traffic control world. We've got 3 different air traffic control centers, Oakland Center, Seattle Center, and Los Angeles Center that cover the airspace. 2 consolidated TRACONs, NorCal and SoCal. The SoCal TRACON is the largest air traffic control facility in the world. And so it's just occupies a portion of our airspace in California, and yet it's the biggest in the world.
You mentioned normal TRACONs, but what are the abnormal TRACONs? That's where they send the lower echelon of the ATC controllers from the bottom end of the class?
Yeah, exactly. But you still call them a controller, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that would be like Magoo approach and the military, Joshua approach, the military ones.
Even Santa Barbara approach.
Yeah,
I would say, and I think there's some others up north. Don't ask me to recite them all. I counted them off the back of my hand here. Then we've got a really unique thing out here called Ocular Glare. And that's a new item showed up on our sectional charts just a couple of years ago. And this thing's for real. There was actually a military airplane, I want to say, and no, it was an airliner in southern Utah that saw this thing from 100 miles away and thought it was an airplane they were about to collide with. So that's how significant these things are.
It is bright, approaching Los Angeles. I've seen it from as far away as like Albuquerque, and you can really make it out. It's the Ivanpah Hydro Solar Power Plant, partially owned by Google, I believe, but it's right on the California-Nevada border, just on the California side, and it can be blinding.
Yep. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about, because we've got so much Class B airspace around California, we have 3 different Class Bs in the state, and each one of them is different. You look on the charts, they're different in curious ways. First of all, San Francisco has suggested routes. There's no procedures. These are a lot of techniques that are used for getting through the San Francisco Class Bravo. This is as distinct from Los Angeles that has published routes. These are little insets off on the side of the chart, and we're going to show you in just a minute how to pull these up on ForeFlight, using ForeFlight. And so there are very specific rules that you need to follow in order to go on these routes through this airspace. And this is different from San Diego. San Diego is the only one that actually has a corridor. A lot of people think Los Angeles, the special flight rules area, is a corridor. And when they say that, they think that this is a space that you are actually not in Class B airspace. Down in San Diego, it's kind of a tunnel through the middle of the Class Bravo. Los Angeles, you are actually inside Class Bravo. And this, it's one of my favorite questions, but we're going to draw a distinction here between a transition route that goes through the Bravo. And that's different than a flyway route that goes around the Bravo, or most often underneath the Bravo.
And for those of you who've been flying in the Los Angeles area long enough, you remember that the Class Bravo, or when it was called a TCA, used to have a corridor that went through it where you were actually flying through a hole or a gap in the Bravo airspace, or TCA. Now, you like Mike said, you are actually flying through and you're getting an exception clearance via what's on your terminal area chart to fly through the airspace.
So this raises the question, on all these routes that go through the airspace, a Class Bravo clearance is required, right? And this is where you need the air traffic controller to say, you are cleared to enter the Class Bravo airspace, maintain this altitude, maintain this course or this heading. There is one exception, and that exception is Los Angeles. I should caveat that. One exception that I know of. Every time I say something, I always get proven wrong. I just got proven wrong on one of those a couple of days ago. But the one exception is the Los Angeles Special Flight Rules area routing over the top of Los Angeles. You're actually inside the Bravo airspace without a clearance. And the reason you can do that is there are special rules. And we're going to show you in just a moment how to get to that.
It could be argued that you have a clearance, you're just carrying it with you on this terminal area chart, which you actually have to have with you to do the procedure.
Right.
To fly through it.
So let's take a little closer look at the San Francisco Class Bravo airspace. You should see that on your screen here. I don't know that we can make that any bigger on everybody's screen.
I know if everybody goes full screen and then they also can slide the chat or the video, they can slide it left and right to resize the PowerPoint or the video of us, which I would recommend making the video of us as small as possible. I look better that way.
Yeah, me too. The first thing you'll notice here, though, is, let me bring up my laser pointer, and you have these blue routes here. These are the flyway charts, flyway routes that, generally speaking, will route you around the airspace. There's another one over here to the west. It goes right over Half Moon Bay. These are blue routes. These are the flyways. They generally take you underneath the Bravo airspace. And that's as opposed to these magenta arrowed routes. These are inside the Bravo airspace, and these will require an ATC clearance. We'll see in just a second. I'm going to zoom in on another version of this, and you'll see that a little bit better. There's a little note here, all these spots here that say ATC clearance is required. So that's one of the major distinctions you need to be aware of.
There's a little magnifying glass on the PowerPoint presenter's view, Mike, that you can click on. It'll zoom in for the, yeah. I think if you click that,
okay.
There you go.
I can't do both the laser pointer and the magnifier at the same time, it looks like.
No, I can't breathe and talk at the same time.
Well, I can walk and chew gum at the same time. That's about my limit right there. So in the Los Angeles Class Bravo, we have kind of the same thing here. Let me zoom in a little bit on this. And maybe I can. Get my laser pointer. No, I can't do both. Again, we have flyways, and we have these magenta arrowed routes that have names on them generally. If you're talking to air traffic control, you can ask them to fly that route. One thing I will note is, in particular, I know for a fact that this Los Angeles flyway chart is very out of date, and there's an organization that Brian and I are both a part of that's working on revamping this and updating it with the modern flows. When the Metroplex project was completed a couple years ago, we never got this far to revise this chart. So it's still a little bit out of date. We're going to zoom in on that just a bit more in a little bit.
And I think it's worthy of note that, again, the red routes are transitions through Bravo. The blue routes are suggested routes to get around or under Bravo.
Yeah. And this is a little rough look. We'll get a little bit closer in on the San Diego one in just a moment. This is the area here, right over the top of Lindbergh Field, which is right here, up to just west of Miramar Airport here, and what's the other one with an M down there? Brian, help me out. Yes. Montgomery.
I think it's Montgomery, Mike.
Yeah. And so this is actually a corridor, and you can see this. Let me pull that up here. If you can see the altitudes there. We're going to cover that in just a minute when we get to actually this slide. Now I'm going to attempt to do the impossible, and I'm going to switch over to my iPad and share that. Takes a moment to do the swap over here. All right. So we're looking at the San Francisco Flyway chart, and I don't have any way to highlight stuff on. Actually, I do if I look at the other version of it. You really need to have this chart on board your aircraft anytime you're trying to navigate your way around one of these Class Bravo airspaces. So the version I'm using right now, if you look down at the bottom of the screen, you can see I'm on the documents page. You need to make sure this document is downloaded into ForeFlight, and then you need to practice accessing this document on the ground before you get in your airplane so that you know where to find this when you get in the airplane in the air and you need this information.
And my suggestion is to leave that up on the documents page so you can get right back to it by toggling documents, maps, and get right to that map.
Right, that's a great idea. Now, if we come back over to the main ForeFlight page, we can select the VFR Flyway chart to overlay on the map. And then it's geo-referenced and is right on there, and you can see this map right where our route of flight is going to go. And if I'm really tricky, I turned off my annotations. So you can annotate your route that you're going to fly through here so you have some idea. And if you look at this now, you can see at the top of this, we've got, this is called the Pacifica VFR transition route, and an ATC clearance is required to be on that. So spend a couple of minutes with your chart and make sure you know where this is. Another technique for getting to this, I'm going to show you is, if we select Map Touch Action, and if we select Bring Chart to Front with Legends. Now, here, let me get rid of all those references I just put on there. We're looking at a sectional chart here. If we zoom in enough, it will eventually change to a tack chart. And if you tap on that tack chart, then we can look over to the edge of it and we'll get access to all the side panel information that's on the real paper chart. So this is the same thing as having a paper chart, and this is perfectly legal to navigate this airspace in this manner. It's a little bit less convenient. Like Brian just suggested, I prefer to have these documents in the documents page, and then you can look at it directly anytime you want. This is one of the ways, if we come down here to the Los Angeles area and zoom in, we can look at the TAC chart. We can zoom over to the side, and lo and behold, this is where our transition routes over LAX are. So again, just like having the paper chart in your airplane.
And a word of caution, I have a lot of pilots ask me about this, and they say, every time I do this, I can't find, I bring Map Touch Action, I bring Chart to Front with Legends, and then I can't see. And the problem is once you zoom out to a certain level, it automatically transitions to a sectional chart. So yeah, while Mike has this zoomed in, if you zoom out, it goes away and turns into a sectional chart, and the panel goes away. So the trick there is to be zoomed in on the TAC chart and then pan over to the side.
And so this is why I prefer to have it over there in the sectional chart, and then you've got immediate access to that section for you.
Right.
Okay, so, and that is about all I have at this point on the ForeFlight. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. This one, and give you control as well, Brian.
You don't want to do that. Use caution.
Use caution. Hey, I got my own set of controls here, so I'm ready to go. All right, so we mentioned a moment ago that we've got 3 major cities in California with over 1 million people. We've also got a ton of military stuff going on. We got military airports and military training routes. And I think a lot of pilots don't spend enough time looking at these military training routes, and they are worthy of your respect while you're flying along. Military aircraft are flying these routes, speeds in excess of 250 knots, maybe 1,000 feet off of the ground. And a good place to go for more information on how MTRs work is in the AIM, section 352. And I want to show just one little section that's a major area of concern in California. We're looking at a section of the chart here, right over the Grapevine. by Lake Hughes VOR and Gorman VOR. And this is the major section that kind of connects the north and the south. It's just north of the Los Angeles area a little bit.
Connecting two major military complexes, yeah.
Oh, yeah, by the way, there's a whole bunch of those too. So the question is, if you look at this section of the chart, how many military training routes do you see? And most people will pick that one up. So you got just the one? Well, if you look a little bit closer, how about these ones? Or how about that? This place is a beehive of MTRs. And remember, you've got military aircraft, fighter aircraft doing their ground, what do they call that? Ground radar flying mode, very fast, very low. They're very task saturated. They don't have time to be looking for a little airplane.
And I have talked to friends who fly these routes in high-speed aircraft, and I asked them if they are looking out the window for all the VFR traffic that's out there, and they just kind of smiled.
I'm sure, I bet they are. And this section right here over Lake Hughes goes from 2,000 to 9,000 feet. And what altitude? Normally when I go through there, I'm flying at 8,500 feet, right through the middle of that. So best to get flight following when you're in that area. And so if you look at this a little bit closer, now we've got this little, I've highlighted it in magenta, that little area there kind of shows you that this is the main part of that particular route. And this one I think is significant because we've got these boxes that tell you you should be listening on this frequency, or at least checking on this frequency for the status of these routes. And they'll know whether there's aircraft flying on these routes or not. So
yeah, flight service will know. And also those routes have those dedicated altitudes on them. Whereas the other routes are just either below 1,500 or above 1,500, and that's all they tell you.
Yeah, and it's below 1,500, and if it's a three-digit number, some part of that might be over 1,500. It might be all of it, might be just one little section of it. You don't know.
Exactly. And I like to tell pilots to fly across that thoroughfare at a 90-degree angle, just like you would when you're jaywalking across the freeway. If you were jaywalking across the 405, you wouldn't cut across at an angle, would you? I don't.
One would prefer to, yeah. Okay, so in addition to all that military traffic, we've also got spaceports. You ever been to a spaceport, Brian?
I've only been to the one at Disneyland, and it's very impressive.
Oh, I love the rocket ride. It was awesome. There's one now out in near Albuquerque where the organizations, Virgin Galactic is doing their flying. But we've got military and civilian spaceport there at Mojave and at Vandenberg Air Force Base. The Vandenberg's not much of a problem because it's inside a restricted airspace that you'll never get access to begin with.
And that's one of those areas I referred to that you have to cut across inland when you're flying up the California coast.
Yeah, I've never been able to get clearance into that particular portion of that restricted. Some of the others, it's possible to do. We mentioned airline traffic, a ton of that. I tried to count how many airports I thought might have airline traffic, and there's just so many, I don't know. There's a ton of flight training going on. You know about the flight training areas a little bit, Brian?
Yeah, there are flight training areas all over the place, and there are some websites you can go to see them. They're also depicted on the chart. Those are usually the ones that I stay away from because that's where everybody is. So I try to train where everybody isn't. But I just think the only thing that we could say here is to maintain vigilance, flying around any training airports, around any metropolitan area or within the fringe areas, because anything could be a training area around these airports.
Yeah, and Brian and I, we mentioned the airline traffic here because a lot of airline pilots, believe it or not, don't fly general aviation. So if you take 100 airline pilots and you ask them what kind of airspace they're in at any particular moment, I'll bet less than 5% of them will know the answer.
I think you're giving them more credit than due. I'd say 2%, but a lot of times they get visual approaches into LAX, and they're supposed to stay above the floor at Class Bravo, but they don't always. So be careful when you're skirting just below Class Bravo airspace on a beautiful day, because airliners or any jets going into LA, not just airliners, could be cleared for a visual approach and might accidentally skirt the bottom of that Class Bravo airspace.
Yep. So I wanted to spend another moment here on gliders and hang gliders. We have a lot of this activity. There's a lot of deserts that have wonderful thermal flying, and also there's a lot of ridges that have great ridge lift for gliders and hang gliders. So what's the difference? You see this symbol on a chart with the G next to a sailplane, usually next to an airport. And it's next to an airport because that's where these gliders, these sailplanes will launch and recover to. They do a lot of their flying miles away. I know in particular there, the Inyo Kern one and even the Tehachapi one there, pilots will come out of these airports and fly for hundreds of miles. So obviously they're not near the airport, but this is the airport they launch and recover from. And you're looking for an aircraft that looks something like this. Generally very long wings, very sleek, very efficient, wonderful flying. If you've never flown a glider, you really ought to go do it. It's
very difficult to see, but the responsibility to see and be seen still remains. So also remember who has the right of way with the gliders. The gliders do because they're less maneuverable.
Yep. And this is as opposed to a hang glider type activity, and that's the same sort of symbol that has an H in a box to it. And these H's normally are not found near an airport because these gliders don't fly out of an airport. They're generally foot launched, and you're looking for something like this. That's what my wife thought I meant when I said, did she want to go for a glider flight one time? And then we saw some of the sailplanes, and she said, oh, well, maybe that won't be so bad. We still haven't done it yet.
Have you ever flown one of those, Mike?
Yes, I have.
I have never. I'm going to see how long I can go without doing it.
Well, your record still stands, so keep it like that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we've got aerobatic activity. Why don't you talk about this one, Brian? You got some over in your neighborhood.
Yeah, we've got the aerobatic practice area up near Fillmore VOR, and many pilots go flying through there without really being aware of what's in there or where it exists. But the chart says, if you look at the little box, it says intensive aerobatic training below 5,500 feet. So you can fly over 5,500 feet and not worry about it. But if you're below that, you kind of do need to worry about it. And it says to go to the chart supplement. And what is the chart supplement? A lot of people ask, where's the supplement? They look at the panel or the side of the chart. When I give a flight review, often don't know, but that's the book formerly known as the Airport Facilities Directory. So you go to that and you go to the special notices and you can see all the, what do they call that? Aerobatic areas and the definitions that are in there. And in the latest one now, thanks to the organization Mike referred to, we've got an actual picture of the airspace where the Santa Paula practice area is there, so you can actually see where it is. You can load it up into ForeFlight and either overfly it or circumnavigate it, so you can see where it is. So go to the special notices of the book formerly known as the Airport Facility Directory, and all of the established areas will be there. There is one out near Redlands, and that actually is a box, aerobatic box, because it's I think it's a predetermined size, and they do competitive aerobatics out there. But remember, it's going to be very difficult to see, for them to see. They're doing a lot of crazy flying, and it's best to just avoid that area and give it a wide berth.
And the reason that this particular one at Santa Paula says waiver required is because you can't do aerobatics on a Victor Airway. And these areas are right next to Victor Airways. We can see one, let me turn on my laser pointer again. You can see a Victor Airway right over Redlands here, and the box is just up here. So you're too close to the Victor Airway to be doing aerobatics. So you need a waiver against that regulation. All right, so moving on now. Condors and Eagles. What? That's not a thing, is it? Well, here, this is Pinnacles. This is just north of Paso Robles a little bit. This is a condor restoration area here.
And they've trained the condors to stay within the confines of that line, haven't they, Mike?
Exactly. Yeah, they're highly trained condors, although they can't seem to teach them not to eat lead bullets, but they can teach them to avoid the airplanes. So this little note is worth taking a moment and read this. It says, maintain at least 3,000 feet terrain clearance in that area. You don't want to meet one of these birds. They look like that. These things weigh up to 20 pounds and a 10-foot wingspan.
And that looks like one of your more intelligent condors.
What? Ah. Can't believe you did that. Moving on. Okay, so let's move on to the main meat of our trip here. We designed a flight plan around the state. We're going to take you to a bunch of places here. It's going to be kind of quick. This is not going to be a deep dive how to fly into all these places because we got a lot of great stuff in this state to go see. But let's get in. The first thing I want to note is there's a lot of important resources available all over the place. One that Brian and I teach a lot is ForeFlight, and you need to know where to find the comments to get this information you need to operate in these places. And a great spot is the airport's page in ForeFlight. You have remarks, and the remarks are official comments that come from the airport sponsor, the airport manager, And these will also be in the airport facility directory and a lot of other places. That's as opposed to a comment, which is a note that somebody like you or I can submit to ForeFlight and put that in there. And then this is an actual pilot report, basically a Yelp review kind of a thing on some aspect of the airport. So it's a great place to go.
Also, Mike, before we kick off on this route of flight that we're going to do, I see some comments in the chat. Somebody mentioned about the parachute jumping, and parachute area is actually very important. I think that was from Jim. Very important to look in the AFD where you see a parachute. Look and see where that is. Sometimes it's a 1 mile radius, sometimes it's a 3 mile radius. Unless you've been flying along and seen a human falling from the sky while you're flying along, you really don't become aware of what's going on here. But I think something happened in my shorts, and then it happened in the parachute jumper's shorts, and he was just falling from the sky. And we thought we were giving the parachute area enough berth, but then I looked in the chart supplement and realized how big an area that is. And it's kind of nebulous depending on the wind. They might have to be further out to glide into their jump zone. So give those areas a lot of berth. If you get flight following, you can find out if jumping is going on. And I think that's worthy of bringing up. So thanks, Jim, for mentioning that. Also, someone said that I'm doing myself a disservice not flying gliders. I am glider pilot rated. It's just the hang gliders that scare me.
Yeah, and I've soloed in a glider, but I never got my license, and it's some of the most enjoyable flying I've ever done. So I've done sailplanes and hang gliders, but not certified for either one.
It definitely help you with your powered airplane engine out procedures.
Yeah, now you realize every powered airplane is just a glider with an engine on it. So we've also got great online tools, and these didn't exist when I was a new pilot. We've got AirNav is a great one. I've been using that since I got back into GA. You've got Google Earth as a great tool to use. You've got local knowledge. So if you're going somewhere you've never been, this is a phone number that you can get right off of AirNav, for instance. This happens to be from Catalina Island. The airport manager there is my friend Justin. He's a licensed pilot. So if you want to fly into that airport, call that number. Maybe you can get some good information with some great advice on how to get in and out of that airport safely. And we're going to come back to Catalina in just a bit. So here's the flight plan we devised, and we're going to start up here in Shelter Cove. This one's a little hard to talk about because neither Brian nor I have ever been there, but I've been talking about it for a long time, thinking about it, and it's on my list to go. Actually, my wife and I were going to head up there last week, but obviously for reasons you can probably figure out, we decided not to make that trip.
Very smoky reasons. Yeah, I'm dying to go up there too. It's on my list.
Yeah, you can park right on the airport there. There's a small hotel right there that you can stay at for the weekend. You can camp on the field if you'd like. It's real close to the redwood groves. If there's any of those left after this debacle is all over with, they might be worth going for a visit. You can rent a car from the airport there and head on out there. Now, one of the difficulties, though, being a coastal airport, it's subject to a lot of coastal stratus, and there are no instrument approaches. So if that's your destination, you might want to have an alternate in mind. Depending on the time of year, you might not be able to get in there, or you might not be able to get out.
And Joel Williams says, bring your own tie downs to Shelter Cove. Probably good advice.
That's a lot of these are places you could be wise to bring your own. And the next stop, we'll move on to Half Moon Bay. I think you've been there a little bit more than me, Brian.
Yeah, I went to San Jose State and used to take dates to Half Moon Bay for dinner all the time. The challenge is not to get sucked in when the marine layer came in, or to get sucked in when the marine layer came in.
Depending on your objective.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's a short walk down to some great restaurants and boating, whale watching, kayaking, that sort of thing. It's a great spot for a day. My stepfather-in-law used to have a piece of property just south there. This is a great place to fly into and spend the weekend with them.
And you taxi down to the south end, the southeast end. There's a parking lot that kind of extends out past the airport and puts you right near the coast. It's just probably a 2-minute walk from where you park your airplane down to the town with the restaurants.
And while you're there in Half Moon Bay, you can take a spin around the whole San Francisco Bay Area on the Bay Tour. And Max Trescott has seminars and some great information on how to fly these tours. There's a website there that we mentioned at sjflight.com. We've got a lot of these links on Brian's website. We'll give you a link to Brian's website toward the end of the talk here. A lot of this information is available online. I know Max sells his guide for this tour Takes about an hour, and I've done it before, and it's a great day. Just throttle back, take your time, enjoy the view, talk to NorCal Approach, and if the visibility is good, it's a spectacular flight. You got lots of great landmarks to visit. So we'll move on down the coast a little bit here to Oceano, Pismo Beach, one of my favorites, one of Jolie Lucas's favorites. Another coastal spot, you can camp right on the field. There's bicycles for free for pilots there on the airport. You can bike down to the beach, a lot of restaurants in town. You can go skydiving, you can go parasailing, and it's right next to the Pismo Beach dunes there. So another great stop for a weekend. There's actually a pretty nice hotel just across the street that's pretty reasonably priced, the Pacific Plaza Resort.
Yeah, and great restaurants too, and the bicycle on field is nice. Now we're going to Avalon Catalina.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
I love going there.
This one, though, is a little bit tricky. This is probably one of the trickiest airports on our tour today. It's got a lot of visual illusions. There's really nothing particularly weird about the airport itself, but it sits 1,500 feet above the ground. So your downwind leg is 1,000 feet above that at 2,600 feet. As you're turning from your downwind leg to your base leg, you're 2,600 feet above the ground, above the surface of the water down there. So you don't have the sense of motion that you have in a normal traffic pattern. It's going to make you feel like you're going slower than you really are. So the natural tendency is to speed up. And that's exactly the wrong thing to do. Just refer to your airspeed indicator, fly the speeds that you always fly in the traffic pattern, and you'll be fine. It's also, the approach end has a very steep cliff on it. If the wind is blowing out of the southwest sort of, and so you've got a headwind on final, there's a nice rotor that can develop there on short final, and there's usually a big downdraft right there. So this is definitely one of those airports you don't want to aim for the numbers on touchdown.
In addition to that downdraft, I think it's also worth pointing out that the slope of the runway, and you were probably about to get into this, gives you an illusion that you're high. And when you feel like you're too high, you tend to come in a little bit lower. Now you're already too low and you hit that downdraft, and what's in front of you but a cliff and some rotors and wind and turbulence. So be very aware of that, as well as getting out there when you're flying across the water. If you fly like from Camarillo or Ventura County area where we are, IFR, they're going to give you that airway that goes about 400 miles offshore. And a lot of pilots will just accept it. Don't do that. You want to get minimum vectoring altitude, get toward the shoreline. You don't want to fly that far offshore unless you have survival gear and rafts and all that stuff with you. VFR pilots, most of the time what pilots will do is head over to Torrance somehow, get up to some good altitude and cross the channel, that 23-mile channel, at a gliding distance from both Torrance and Catalina at all times.
Yep. And this is one most FBOs or flight schools that rent airplanes require you to go with a flight instructor on your first time in here. And I think that's really good advice. Get somebody who's been there before. And this is definitely one to call that airport manager and give Justin a buzz and tell him you're on your way, and does he have any advice. And it's a great stop. You can go take the tram into town and spend a weekend there. There's golfing, there's restaurants, scuba diving. I've dived there a lot, and it's a great spot to go. So while you're here in Catalina, go ahead and take a trip around the Los Angeles Basin. For this one, I'm going to recommend Pilot Getaway's website has a nice little page. I got this picture off of George's website there for that. A beautiful view. Even if you can do this flight at night, it's spectacular at night. There's so much to see in the basin. It takes about 45 minutes or so. You definitely need flight following for this one. There's so much traffic, and you're going to have your nose pasted on the window looking at the view. And you will transition through the Class Bravo airspace over the airport. So that's why you have to be talking to air traffic control.
And again, the links to all these tours and airports are going to be on my webpage. I set up a special link. We'll show you at the end of this PowerPoint, which I think we're running behind on time. We probably should motor through.
Better go fast. So next stop, we'll go down to Agua Caliente Springs. This is one I've been to a couple of times. There's a nice little campground across the street from the airport with some hot springs, natural hot springs. It's closed in the summer because it's just too bloody hot. Nobody wants to go there in the summer. But wintertime, it's great. There is nothing at the airport. There's a little bit of a wide spot in the pavement for you to park on. It might fit 6 airplanes on it. So if it's full, I don't know what your plan B is going to be. While you're down there, there's a great Enzo Borrego Sky Tour. Brian told me about this a couple of weeks ago. very old document you used to be able to get from park service stations in the airport, in the park. And it takes you on a flying tour. This is another one that I believe it was, yeah, Pilot Getaways has a link on this on their Air Tours page as well.
Yep.
Another one just adjacent to this is one I discovered just the other day. This one is a tour of the desert training facility. General Patton used this area between the world wars to train tank drivers for their assaults in North Africa. So while you're down there, you can tour. There's some solar power facilities, lava flows, volcanic crater. There's intaglios there. You ever heard of that, Brian?
No, I haven't. I've never heard that word ever.
An intaglio is an ancient drawing in the ground just north of Blythe, right along the Colorado River, just a couple of miles north of Blythe. That's the little extension that I put here out. Oops, I lost my laser pointer here. This little section down here, just on the river, these ancient, we don't know how old they are, probably 1,000 years old or so. Giant, there's a couple of giant people and some kind of a four-legged beast that's down there. It's really cool.
That's very cool. I'm gonna have to try that sometime. I think we're gonna have to do a pretty rapid click through here and then announce our winner, because the next speaker's on in 4 minutes, I think.
Hey, we've got the airplane.
Yeah.
So we'll go up to Big Bear. This is where we have our high density altitude training. Again, most first timers up here, I really recommend you take an instructor with you. Density altitude is real. We lose about an airplane a year up there due to improper calculation of density altitude and unawareness of how the airplane responds. Know what happens to your VX and VY at altitude. Don't use your sea level values while you're flying at high density altitude. Next, we'll pop up to Kern Valley. You've been in there, haven't you, Brian?
I have. What a fun place to go camping. And they even have a restaurant if you don't feel like cooking.
Yeah, camping on the field restaurant. My wife and I stayed at a bed and breakfast in town that sadly now has closed. One of the best breakfasts we ever had.
The sectional doesn't do justice to the terrain around there. So look at Google Earth, or take a good look at what it really looks like. Next flight is to Furnace Creek, lowest point in the U.S. there at Death Valley.
And again, there's not much on the airport. You can take a short walk to a restaurant and a hotel and bring your tie downs. There's no procedures out there, but it's the desert. There's never any weather out there.
Beautiful in the winter and spring. Then it's just a 79-mile flight from there to the highest point in the contiguous 48 states. And now it's actually at 15,005 feet. And there it is.
Yeah, must have had a couple earthquakes, huh?
Couple.
And we'll pop up to Columbia next.
Columbia's a fun place. Home of my college roommate. Almost landed at the wrong airport going there. California, Calaveras County, very easy to do, but near the lake. Just bring your tie downs. You can camp on field. Wonderful on-field camping airport.
This
Watch
is
out
actually
for firefighters.
Yeah, in the summertime right now, those guys are real busy up there. This
Yep.
happens to be where I met Jolie Lucas a number of years ago, camping on the field. So, and over to our last stop now in South Lake Tahoe.
Bigger city, a lot more fun, a lot more to do. Again, big ticket here is to check your density altitude again. It's up high. Getting out of that valley can be tough.
So that concludes our trip that we designed here. And I don't know if anybody's put an answer in the chat box there as to what is the common element among all these airports there. But you still have some time to throw it up in the chat box there. General flying tips. The main thing is plan ahead. Plan a little bit of time online with your virtual tools at home. Spend some time looking at your iPads or whatever tool you use. Get familiar with the airspace. This one's going to dial right into my common factor here, but the fact is you need to be comfortable working on the radio to deal with this airspace. If you're not, spend some time in an area that does have a lot that you can do it. And know the airspace, know how to get in and out. What are the requirements in a Bravo, in a Charlie, in a Delta? Know what kind of airspace is ahead of you and be fully ready to enter it when you get there. And then know your capabilities. And I'm not just talking about you as a pilot. You need to know your airplane's capabilities also, performance-wise, your avionics. What information do you have on board that you can use to solve this, whatever issue's coming up? Don't ask too much of yourself, your airplane, or your equipment. Get a good weather briefing before you go. No, not just where the weather is, but where it isn't. Keep a plan B in mind. Something could happen, and maybe it's more than weather. Maybe a disabled aircraft is on the runway.
Always leave yourself an out.
And slow down. It's a great place to fly. We enjoy the view coming out here, so take your time, enjoy the view.
Well, Jolie has told me about the winner of our headset. Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset winner is CalPilot member Brian Lee from Fresno Chandler Airport.
All right, Brian. Woohoo! Thanks for showing up. There's a lot more great prizes coming up today. So Jolie will be in touch with you about how to obtain your prize. We're just going to jam that right through the camera here. So,
and then I'll buy it from you for $50 if you want.
I'll give you 75. Okay, and finally, let's see if I can move on to the next slide here. It's not going. There it is. My motto always: fly safe, fly more, and have some fun. You want to fill that logbook up to the point where you have to buy another one. And
absolutely, there's the website down at the bottom that has the links to all the things we just referred to, so you can see them in more detail. CaptainShift.com/SoCal. Thanks again.
Thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to be here, and we hope you enjoy flying around California.